The best thing about Wales is its people. Those who love us, make us, and shape us. And we care about them. Their dignity, their future, their hopes, their dreams. That's what brought me into politics. People. I am who I am today because of where I came from. My story is very much like yours. A working class family, free school meals, and a mum who's now a full-time carer for my elderly dad.
I've been a carer for my husband, Rufus, for 7 years. I was a sort of a person that I liked to have my freedom to go out. And just simple things. I mean, it was lovely, it was a happy life. And it was a happy life with my husband. And then this dementia came in, and as the years have gone on and I have to look after him all the time, I've now lost all my identity.
Through my parents, I see a social care crisis. Through my son, I'm driven to work harder for a world-class education system and to invest in it. I want all children in Wales to have the opportunities I had, to reach their potential wherever they're from. No child or young person in Wales should be left behind. The Wales we live in today isn't as good as it gets. The Labour Party, who once stood up for a family like mine, has failed us. They failed our NHS and our doctors and nurses. That's your family member waiting longer than expected for life-saving treatment, and frontline staff held back by a health minister in denial about the scale of the problem. They failed to get our children to the same levels as England, Scotland and Northern Ireland in literacy, numeracy and science. Where I see injustice, I will speak up for you, because it's what I've always done. It's why I do what I do. The new Wales Plaid Cymru will build will bring opportunity to our youth and dignity to those in old age. A society which brings out the best in its people and offers them the best in return every step from cradle to grave. Change will only come when Wales finds its voice. Where the other parties put Wales last, Plaid Cymru will put our people first. Our mothers, our fathers, our daughters, our sons. Because it's our future. Change is possible. Change is coming. And we'll win it together by voting Plaid Cymru.
Sa'di, the great 12th century Persian poet, gave us these words of wisdom 800 years ago, which now adorn the entrance of the United Nations in New York. Human beings are joined together whole, the product of one essence, one soul. It's not possible to be human and remain immune to the sting of someone else's pain. Connection. That's the message of this year. No woman, no man, no child, no person is an island. An injury to one is an injury to us all. We are all connected. By protecting you, I also protect myself, care for my family, heal my community, nurture my nation, regenerate the world. We are part of the original World Wide Web of humanity, which long predates the internet through which I'm speaking to you now. These bonds of affection are stronger and more durable than any chain of infection, even in the midst of a global pandemic. We are all interconnected. It's this one ancient truth we have learned anew in this year of infinite challenge. In forcing us apart, the virus has strangely drawn us closer together. Screens like the ones you're looking at now, where they once distracted us from each other, have begun to connect us to each other, from the work Zoom meeting to the ubiquitous online quiz and the digital house party. In slowing us down, the pandemic has forced us to stop and think about who and what really matters to us. And we found it was the people in our life, our family, our community, the key workers that kept us safe, sheltered and healthy, fed and sane. We clapped them at our doorsteps and smiled at each other across walls and fences and waved at neighbours across the road on newly quiet streets. We found new paths to walk and run in, in parks and woods we never knew we had, and realized our connection to nature was as important as our connection to each other. And this year of health emergency has deepened our resolve to address those other crises of climate and of nature. This has been a year of 1 million acts of love, but also 1 million acts of sacrifice. Our homes have become our safe haven, but for some they felt like prisons. For a nation that likes to coach up close, social distancing has sometimes felt like pure agony. And beneath the masks, though there are often hidden smiles, there can also lie a well of loneliness and grief. We have lost so many, and many have lost so much. But even on the darkest of these days, there have been rays of hope. Here's my son Ela's version of the little rainbows the children of Wales made as a gift to the NHS, and to remind us all that we'll get through this and that there are better days to come. I think he might have got a little help with this. He's only 2. When I look at his smiling face, or hear him chuckle, or say, "Kuches gyda daddy," because he's learned that's the best way to get another 5 minutes before lights out, then it's hard not to feel optimistic about the future. The joy that he brings is just the perfect antidote to all of life's stresses and strains, except perhaps when he wakes you up at 4 o'clock in the morning. For my parents too, my father living with dementia and my mother caring for him, so sometimes with no life of her own, a new grandson, lovely, unexpected surprise that he was, has given them a reason to live and laugh again. Being apart these last few months has been the most massive wrench for them, as it has been for so many others. My parents have shown me what resilience means these last few months, and that gives me the faith that we will indeed get through this together. Resolving not to miss her grandson growing up, my mother taught herself to use a computer and get online for the first time at the age of 81, a latter-day digital native. She has now said she's determined to live to 100 to see him go to university. The way things are going, she'll probably enroll herself. There is no challenge that a determined Welsh mam cannot overcome. So I'd like to thank my parents and all those like them that have stayed strong behind a shield that sometimes must have felt like a cage. But an even bigger thank you must go to the young that have given up more than anyone in a collective act of selfless love. And our thoughts this time has to be with students away from home for the very first time that are facing a very difficult situation. I'd like especially to thank all those that have served us in small ways and large ways, through long days and endless nights, in our hospitals, our care homes, our schools, colleges and childcare centres, our shops, our buses, trains and taxis, our delivery drivers, park keepers, bin women and men, to all those I have not mentioned that have cared for us all, thank you. 10 million thank yous. From all of us, for all of us. Everything that can be done must be done to keep you and keep us all safe in the winter months ahead. Wales has shown what it can do in the last 6 months. We've seen a great spirit of resourcefulness in the face of adversity, infinite ingenuity and boundless dexterity, time and time again. We saw it first in the emergency hospitals that rose in record time. Faced with the unprecedented, Wales became almost in an instant an innovation nation. In just 6 months, Welsh companies and Welsh universities have developed a range of new tools in the battle against the virus, from the use of wastewater to identify infections in a local population, to a raft of new testing methods, from using blood pinpricks on a card, to a breathalyzer, to a new point of care device that can give results in 20 minutes. In new medical technology, we've seen the pulse oximeter device designed at the University of South Wales, and Dr. Rhys Thomas and C.R. Clarke's CPAP ventilator currently being trialled in Bangladesh. And because of dozens of companies that heeded the call, Wales now produces its own PPE. We have been at the leading edge of research and innovation in new treatments, both in hospitals and in the community. And despite Wales, in the First Minister's words, being older, poorer and sicker on average than the rest of the UK, we have a higher survival rate in hospitals for the most critically ill, as high as 65%, for example, in the University of Wales Hospital, and a lower level of excess deaths overall. In Ceredigion, former biology teacher Barry Rees designed a homegrown contact tracing system which has continued to keep the county safe. And since the start of a national test and trace system in Wales, 98% of positive cases have been asked for contacts and 93% of their close contacts reached, compared to 80% and 86% respectively in England. Wales is a community of communities, and it's that connection that can keep us safe. The Welsh Government hasn't got everything right, and as a constructive and conscientious opposition, we have pointed out those things that we would do differently. But I think it is right too, just as we thank others for their public service, to thank the First Minister for doing a difficult job at a challenging time to the best of his ability. He has approached that task with a seriousness that has sadly been lacking in others. The vacancy at the heart of the United Kingdom, as the First Minister described the Prime Minister recently, is the best argument for self-government since Thatcher. If we're going to abolish anything, then can it please be Westminster, that half unelected, faux populist, out-of-touch, Eton-dominated, crumbling cathedral of privilege. In the early part of the crisis, the truth is the Welsh Government followed Westminster too closely, too slow into lockdown, too fast to abandon test and trace. On everything from PPE to testing and SAGE, we were locked into UK systems that were world lacking, not world leading. And Wales paid too heavy a price as a result. Though we had lower mortality than England, by the summer Wales still had the 5th highest death toll in Europe, according to the ONS. But then the Welsh Government had started to chart its own course. We said, set up your own scientific advice group. They did, with a technical advisory cell. We said, source your own PPE. They did, through the experienced team at NHS Wales Shared Services, a central unit that England lacked. We said, don't be seduced by Westminster's confused, flip-flopping messaging and policy, and we in Wales stuck to the clear health first line. We said, adopt a zero COVID strategy, and the Welsh Government edged closer, though never quite went the whole way. But for a time, cases here in August were lower than anywhere in the UK. We are obviously now poised at a very different and dangerous point, and there are real risks that all the progress from the pain of the spring to the gains of the summer could be lost. We're starting to follow Westminster again. Now, coordination and alignment clearly makes sense wherever possible, but not if a four-nation approach means one nation gets to call the shots and they're repeatedly off target. Our reliance on the failing UK lighthouse labs has cast a shadow on our own test and trace capacity. The 10 o'clock pub curfew dreamt up by Westminster seems to be driven more by the desire to be seen to be doing something rather than doing something that is well thought out that will actually work. Strategic indecisiveness has bedeviled the Westminster government since the very beginning of the crisis. It has never been clear what they're trying to achieve. Having flirted with, then later rejecting, herd immunity, there were only two possible strategies to follow: elimination or mitigation. The UK government has oscillated between the two, which is the worst of all worlds, because you have all the economic costs of lockdown, but fewer of the health benefits in terms of lives saved. The curfew epitomises that approach. It places considerable cost on the hospitality sector, but there isn't clear evidence that on its own it will have the desired effect. Prevarication is our worst enemy, as we learnt in March. This is what the Welsh Government's own scientific advisors are saying. So what do we need to do? What would I do as First Minister? Well, the Welsh Government needs to maintain the independence of mind it discovered back in the summer. It should try and persuade the Westminster Government to stop hesitating and act quickly and decisively. But if it fails, it must be ready to act alone. Where they are slow and soft, we need to be swift and solid. Half-hearted measures now bring with them all the misery of a full lockdown down the line. Giving some things up earlier, by contrast, means gaining a lot later, as measures that are more effective can also be shorter lasting. So here are 5 urgent priorities. The Welsh Government is right to adopt a local and even hyper-local approach, as it's doing in Llanelli. But be as focused as the data allows you to be. But in those areas that are under higher restriction, we should close pubs and off-licence earlier, as at least one of the local authorities has asked, or even close them entirely for a period, and insist on targeted sector-specific support for those businesses affected. We should test asymptomatic contacts of people who have tested positive. This was the original Public Health Wales plan. It's what the Centre for Disease Control in the United States has argued for in the teeth of opposition from the White House. On this issue, I suggest it's sensible not to be on the same side as President Trump. We should provide more financial support to compensate people who isolate at home for lost income. £500 is a start, but it's not nearly enough. The UK government should double it. We need to get every person entering or returning to Wales from abroad tested and retested again within days. Finally, we need to make a ventilation plan for every public building and workplace, school and college a legal requirement as soon as we practically can. These 5 steps may not fully compensate for the abject failings of Westminster's disastrous testing system, nor for their unforgivably relaxed approach to international travel at this time. But they would put Wales on the front foot and avoid a second wave turning into a third and fourth. If we've learned one thing during the pandemic, it's that an over-reliance on Westminster leads to worse results, and that better outcomes can be secured by following the Welsh way. It's often said to me that now is not the time to talk of that Welsh way, of independence and self-government, when we're battling a global pandemic. But to me, the experience of the last 6 months has brought to the fore the need to accelerate the process of Wales charting its own course, rather than being at Westminster's incompetent whim. Nid dyma'r amser I drafod annibyniaeth meddrai. Ond os nad nawr, yna pryd. Pryd well I ystyried sut I brysuro'r broses o Gymru'n dewis I dyfodol ei hun, yn ytrach na bod ar fympwy di-glem, di-drefen a di-hyd San Steffan. Wedi dwyn ein profion, mae Llywodraeth Prydain nawr yn bygwth dwyn ein pwerau. Gadewch I ni felly ddwyn perswad ar bobl Cymru I ddewis dyfodol yn rydd o Boris a'i giwed. Y dyfodol hwnnw a amlinellir yn adroddiad y Comisiwn Annibyniaeth, carreg filltir bwysig yn y ddadl gyhoeddus dros drywydd cyfansoddiadol ein cenedl. Hoffwn ddiolch o galon I bawb y gyfrannodd a dwaith y Comisiwn, yn enwedig I Elfyn Llwyd am gyflwyno'r gwaith mwyaf cynhwysfawr a phellgyrhaeddol ar y pwnc hyd yn hyn. Mae hwn yn ddarn o waith gonest a thrwyadl. Ni fydd pawb yn cytuno gyda phob gair, ond drwy hynny y gobaith yw y bydd yn esgor a drafodaeth fywiog o fewn y blaid ac ymhell tu hwnt am y Gymru annibynnol yr hoffwn ei gwireddu. Nid ymarferiad mewnblyg yw hwn, ond egin sgwrs genedlaethol mwyn creu cyngreiriad newydd. Gwn fod rwymau teyngarwch pleidiol yn rhai tyn. Gwn fod newid arfer oes yn anodd, ond fe wni hefyd fod yr awydd am annibyniaeth yn gryf y tu hwnt I rengoedd y blaid. Os ydym am newid Cymru, Rhaid dechrau trwy newid Llywodraeth Cymru, ac mae hynny'n golygu pleidleisio dros blaid Cymru. Rwy fi eisiau bod yn brif weinidog ar Llywodraeth sy'n credu yn hawl i dinasyddion i ddewis trywydd i dyfodol i hun. Llywodraeth sy'n credu yn yr egwyddor ddemocrataidd symlaf oll, hawl pobl Cymru i benderfynu ffawd Cymru. Mae degawdau wedi mynd hibo ers i Lewis Valentine yngan y geiriau hyn. Bu degau o wledydd bychain cynddrwg i byd a hithau, ond mynasant ryddid, ac y mae mwy o lywenydd a llawnder yn ei misg nag y bu erioed. Y llawnder a'r llawenydd hynny yw fy nelfryd ar gyfer y Gymru annibynnol. Cymdeithas sy'n fwy caredig, gofalgar a goddefgar. Nid annibyniaeth mwyn annibyniaeth, ond nid mwyn ennill dadl, ond mwyn ennill dyfodol gwell i bawb o bobl yn gwlad. Cyn y Nadolig, byddaf yn ymateb yn gynhwysfawr i adroddiad y Comisiwn, ond yn y cyfamser, gadewch i ni barhau i adeiladu'r mudiad sy'n rhoi'r ni yn annibyniaeth. Ni, nid fi, sydd yn annibyniaeth. We in Plaid Cymru have a clear goal for our country. We want to stand on our own 2 feet, independent, free and equal with other nations across the world. But in becoming an equal nation, we have our eyes on a higher goal of becoming ourselves a nation of equals. That should be no surprise. The idea of equality is woven into the very fabric of our history, our culture, our character. It was the Welshman, Robert Owen, who gave the world the word socialism, and another, the Tenby mathematician, Robert Record, who gave the world the equals sign. Ending up in a debtor's prison, Record would surely approve the idea of becoming a nation of equals and ending poverty and injustice. It's something that should unite us all. Income inequality means lower life expectancy, lower literacy and numeracy, lower social opportunity. It means higher infant mortality, higher crime, obesity, mental illness and addiction. It means not just greater unfairness for some, but greater misery for all of us, because unequal societies are universally unhappy on every single score. Remember that pandemic lesson. We are all connected. Wales as a country has been going round in vicious circles for decades, our feet tied to a rusting anchor of poverty tearing away at our nation's core. To become a nation of equals, our small country will need ideas that are big and bold. This really is a time to leap, because small steps just won't cut it. Managing child poverty, homelessness and pollution simply won't do anymore. We have to eradicate them in the same way we are trying to eliminate this virus. This isn't just the right thing to do. It's the hard-headed, logical, more cost-effective one too. Every pound invested in homelessness returns triple. Ending child poverty is the best investment in our collective future that we could ever make. Why manage a problem when we can solve it? And being a true nation of equals means turning every form of injustice from hallmark of our present to footnote of our past. A Wales that tolerates racial injustice or gender inequality, prejudice against the disabled, homophobia or transphobia, or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, or ageism or classism will never be fair or free. Because, as the president of the WHO reminds us, no one is safe until everyone is safe. We are all connected. Many of us are inspired by the language of Build Back Better. But let's lay the foundations of permanent change. Let's change Wales for good. Change this year has been a destructive force in our lives. But it can be a force for good. That's the change we so desperately need. the change that changes everything so we can focus on the things that matter most to us. What did we miss the most? Not our cars or filling our closets with clothes. We realized what the basics of life were. Affordable housing, decent food, accessible childcare, economic security, our health, and the essential workers on whom we depend. In the spring, the silenced traffic brought us a new awareness of the beauty, but also the fragility of nature and our environment. That localized consciousness brought with it a greater focus on the threat of climate change to the planet as a whole. And we found out where the beauty of life is to be found: in family, in community, in love and joy. Yes, we missed excitement, variety and fun too, but the thing we most missed was enjoying them together. The thing we missed the most is us. Imagine if we redesigned everything to put that humanity at its heart. Now that's what I'd call change worth voting for. We're stuck in the rut of a system, political and economic, that's based on fundamental disadvantage. So deep and so old, the injustice at its heart is fossilized. We can't chip away at it. We have to dismantle it completely and then build something new. So where should we start? Well, think of what we've learned over the last few months. It's the young people and young families that are bearing the biggest brunt of society's uneven burdens. We need to give them hope for tomorrow and a helping hand today. That means universal free childcare for every family and for every child from age 1 on. A Welsh child payment for every child in a family that is in need. A guaranteed job for every young person that needs one, working on a green recovery, caring for our children, for our elderly, for our planet. And hundreds of pounds off the bill for the average family by reforming the unfair council tax as a first step to replacing it with something fairer altogether. We've seen how important having a home is this year, but it's never been more difficult today to own your own, and in the rental sector next year, an epidemic of evictions looms. Well, here's my commitment. We will solve the housing crisis in Wales. We'll build 10,000 homes a year, public homes on public land, genuinely affordable, high quality and to the highest environmental standards. 50,000 in total during our first 5-year term, 30,000 social homes, 15,000 affordable purchase homes, and 5,000 affordable rental homes. That means taking 30,000 families off council house waiting lists, giving 15,000 first-time buyers genuinely affordable homes, and starting to build up a stock of publicly owned, affordable cost rental housing. This will be the biggest public housing programme in Wales since the 1970s. And while we're doing that, we'll end no-fault evictions and freeze and cut unfair rent in the private rented sector. We'll tax second homes and end the housing blight in our rural communities. And we'll start to put the young unemployed back to work in a national plan to retrofit every house in Wales to end fuel poverty and decarbonise our country. And here's a third and final priority that should be at the core of everything we do. Care. Those who provide it and those that need it. The pandemic has held up to us a dark mirror of how we've organised our society, and it's a sobering sight. Care has been the forgotten sector, underfunded, undervalued, its workers underpaid because the state, yes, even under a Labour government, outsourced to private firms on the clear understanding that they would provide the maximum number of care hours at the minimum price. We've seen where that has led us. When I'm First Minister, I will never allow that to happen again. We will introduce parity between the pay scales in the care and healthcare sectors and give NHS workers the decent pay rise for which they are currently campaigning. We'll bring care back where it belongs, a public service, publicly funded, paying decent wages, a minimum of £10 an hour in the public sector. And as part of a national health and care service, social care, like healthcare, will be free to all who need it. The first 100 days of a Plaid Cymru government will be more radical than the preceding 20 years. Caring, building and believing in a good life for everyone and a better life for you and your family. Changing Wales for good. Now that's something worth believing in. Not just for the better, but changing Wales forever. Newid Cymru am byth. Putting us on a new path permanently, ultimately means independence. But that journey to a better, fairer future, a nation of equals, starts with us, here, now, today. In the shadow of this pandemic, ask not what you can do for Wales. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what we can do together, for each other, for good.
Y peth gorau am Gymru yw ei phobl. Y bobl sydd wedi ein meithrin ni, ein siapo ni, ein caru ni, a maen nhw'n bwysig I ni. A'i dyfodol nhw, a'i gobeithio nhw, a'i breuddwydio nhw. Dyna pam mod I mewn gwleidyddiaeth. Pobl. I fi pwy ydw I heddiw, oherwydd o ble des I. Mae fy stori I fel eich stori chi. Teulu dosbarth gweithio, prydau ysgol am ddim, a mam sy'n bellach yn gofalu am fy nhad yn llawn amser. Yn fy rieni, wy'n gweld argyfwng mewn gofal cymdeithasol. Yn fy mab, wy'n cael fy ngyrru I weithio'n galetach I greu ac I fuddsoddi mewn system addysg orau'r byd i'n plant. Wi eisiau bob plentyn yng Nghymru gael y cyfleoedd ges I ac I gyrraedd I potensial o ble bynnag maen nhw'n dod. Ble bynnag wy'n gweld anghyfiawnder, fe na I siarad ar eich ran. Achos dyna beth wedi wneud eriod. Dyna pam wy'n gwneud be wy'n gwneud bob dydd. Nid yw'r Gymru I ni'n byw ynddi heddi, gystal ag y gallai fe fod. Mae'r blaid lafur a oedd ar un adeg yn sefyll lan dros deuluoedd fel yn un ni, bellach wedi'n gadael ni lawr. Ond wedi gadael yn gwasanaeth iechyd a'n doctoriaid a nyrsys I lawr. A'ch teuluoedd chi sy'n gorfod aros yn hirach na disgwyl am driniaeth iachyd I bywydau. Nhw a staff ar y reng flaen sy'n cael I dal yn ôl gan weinidog iechyd sy'n gwadu maint y broblem. Maen nhw wedi methu a chael yn plant I'r un lefelau a Lloegr, yr Alban a Gogledd Iwerddon mewn llythrennedd, rifedd a gwyddoniaeth. Bydd y Gymru newydd dan Arweinydd Plaid Cymru yn dod â chyfleoedd newydd i'n pobl ifanc a gurdda sy'n henoed. Cymdeithas sy'n caniatáu I bobl gyrraedd I potensial ym mhob cam o'i bywydau. I ni gyd yn gwybod, taw dim ond ni sy'n mynd I greu y dechrau newydd sydd I angen ar yn gwlad, yr arweinyddiaeth newydd, y gobaith newydd, y Gymru newydd. Dim ond ni all wneud I hyn ddigwydd. Pobl Cymru. Dim ond pan fydd Cymru yn canfod I llais y daw newydd. Lle mae'r pleidiau eraill yn rhoi Cymru yn ola, bydd Plaid Cymru yn rhoi ein pobl yn gynta. Ein mamau, ein tadau, ein merched, ein meibion. Achos ein dyfodol ni yw e. Mae newid yn bosib. Mae newid yn dod. Ac fe nillwn ni hyn gyda'n gilydd drwy bleidleisio dros Blaid Cymru.